We'd like to welcome Austan Goolsbee to our broadcast of Balanced Power here on Bloomberg Television and on radio worldwide. Austan, you heard us talking here, 22,000 jobs, 4.3% unemployment. How's that economy of yours holding up?
Well, you never make too much of any one month, but it's definitely below what we would consider the break even for job growth. The only thing I want to highlight is we're getting some cross currents in the data, and so we want to be careful thinking about where we are in the business cycle. We know that in 2024 and going back into 2023 as well, when immigration was high, we were getting jobs numbers of 185,000 a month, which was faster than the break even, but it wasn't a very good indication of where we were in the business cycle. And that could be at work in these numbers too, that they could be artificially lower than the break even because immigration's going the other way and labor supply the other way. So for me, I like looking at a broader portfolio of numbers, and I think things that are rates and ratios prove to be a little more accurate as indicators of business cycle last year. Those include the unemployment rate, the layoff rate, the vacancy rate, the hiring rate. And you see some stability on those.
You've called them the four horsemen of the labor market.
Yeah, the four horsemen of truth on the labor market. Yeah.
The labor market does seem, though, to have deteriorated some. Does this report today basically lock in a rate cut for September 17th?
You know the rules. I'm not allowed to speak for the rest of the Fed, the FOMC. I'm only speak for myself. I want to get more information. I'm still undecided as we're going into this. If it looks like the labor market is deteriorating on grounds more than just the monthly payroll numbers, because I want to emphasize again, when you have population growth changing around behind the scenes, just the aggregate monthly payroll growth is not a great indicator of the business cycle. If we start to see deterioration across all the four horsemen of truth in the labor market, the unemployment rate, the hiring rate, if we were to start seeing layoffs, then I think we would be nervous on the employment side of the mandate. But we can't disregard, we got to look at the inflation side too. And the more mild numbers we get on inflation, the better I'll feel about just focusing on the labor market. But in the last inflation reports, we also had this uptick in inflation coming from services. So I think we want to make sure that that's more of a blip and not a more ominous indicator.
Well, let me ask this. Because you'll be in the blackout when we get the CPI report next week, what would it take for you to hold off on a rate cut in terms of an inflation result?
It's not going to be a specific number. If you saw X number, then you would change. It would be, we're trying to get the through line of where the economy is. And one side of that shows relative weakness in the job market, at least measured by monthly payroll, more stability looking at more accurate measures. And then on the other side, if the inflation numbers come in and they give some indication that the inflation from tariffs is not looking to be persistent, or that the uptick in inflation on services, again, does not look to be persistent, looks to be more like it was just a temporary blip in the data, then that would provide comfort to me that we're still on what I was calling the golden path, and that rates can come down a fair amount.
Well, the administration thinks that you've fallen off the path. The universal response from administration officials today, including the president, is that you're still too late, that you should have been cutting earlier.
Factually, yes, that is what they said. I mean, my view is we go to the FOMC meeting and we look at the data and the economic outlook as best we can to figure out the through line. A lot of people outside the FOMC have a lot of opinions, but the independence of the monetary authority from political interference is critically important if we don't want inflation to come back.
Well, for the economy's sake, are you behind the curve?
It depends what you make of what the through line is on the economy. So as I say, if you take the payroll employment numbers, they show weakness. If you take the open job vacancy rate or you look at the layoff rate, they don't show weakness. They show pretty stable full employment kind of values, sort of where they were, or sometimes even better than they were pre-COVID in what was a pretty tight labor market. And on the inflation side, we've had some really benign readings, which would not give you any indigestion on that side. But we now have at least one report where you see services inflation bumping up, and services inflation is not a thing that would likely be coming from tariffs. So it would tend not to be a one-time cost increase. So we got some currents that we have to balance out here, and that's fine. This is what always happens. There are conditions change. The central bank is supposed to be the steady hand, and there's political argument and there are market arguments, up, down, sideways. They have a lot of variability, and as I say, we're supposed to be taking the steady hand and figuring out the through line.
Well, the president's argument seems to be, at least the way he was talking last night, as these numbers may be bad, but kind of channeling his inner Brooklyn Dodger fandom. He said, wait till next year. Next year, when all these tech palaces are built, we're going to see hiring like crazy. You've got to put in a new forecast for unemployment and for inflation at the next meeting. Do you see a rebound ahead and stronger economic growth and employment growth in 2026?
Yes. I mean, I think to me, until we get more convincing evidence, otherwise, I still think we're most likely in a kind of a full employment space where we're generating jobs and the economy continues to grow. This slowdown in payroll employment, the aggregate jobs number, as I say, you got to be extremely careful taking that as an indicator of the business cycle when things like immigration or labor supply and labor force participation are moving around behind the scenes. So to the extent that anybody's saying they think it's a strong job market and the job market may get even stronger going into 26, that's entirely a possibility. And that if it is, to me, that's still on the golden path that we're around stable full employment.
We can't, unfortunately, avoid politics in these situations these days. Just a few hours ago, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent came out with quite a broadside against the Fed in the Wall Street Journal, laying out a lengthy bill of particulars against the central bank. Your research is bad. Your forecasts are bad. You've contributed greatly to income inequality. You've destroyed the housing market, blurred the lines between fiscal and monetary policy, and created a culture in Washington where policymakers rely on the Fed to bail them out after they make poor fiscal choices. Are these criticisms fair or unfair?
Look, that's for the American people or the pundits or somebody to decide. Like I say, what we do at the Federal Open Market Committee is go down there as a collection and do what the law requires us to do. That is, set monetary policy based on maximizing employment and stabilizing the prices. At a moment like this, where we're getting shocks that are pushing us in a stagflationary direction, driving down employment and driving up prices simultaneously, that's a difficult environment for the central bank to be in. I've been in the Fed for coming on 3 years, so I don't know about the long historical litany of complaints that someone might have. Overall, we just go there and do our job. That's what the law requires us to do. And so I'm not going to get into a political argument about it.
Well, let me ask it this way. One of the criticisms he makes is that the Fed has a gain of function problem. In other words, since the great financial crisis, you've had a lot of tools to the toolbox, including quantitative easing, forward guidance, things like that. And the Fed also strayed into climate change. You've heard those arguments before, and other things like that, the fate idea for inflation. Are any of those valid, and is anybody at the Fed working on whether or not they have worked as you hoped and should be kept in the toolbox?
Well, yes, people are working and thinking about that all the time, both at the Fed and among economic researchers, monetary researchers around the country. As I say, these are a bunch of things that are from the years before I was at the Fed. I'm certainly not going to speak to them. I don't have any privileged information about how those were determined. I think on overall dual mandate grounds, you have to say that as you look at 2023 and 2024, we've got the inflation. We're coming off a period where inflation was well higher than the 2% inflation target. But we succeeded in getting inflation down almost as much as it has ever fallen in a single year. And for the first time ever in the United States and probably of any rich country in the world, we had that massive of drop of inflation without having a recession, without the unemployment rate rising dramatically. And that's what we should be trying to do. That is absolutely our goal, to carry out the golden path and to continue to carry it out now. And that involves figuring out the through line of where we are in the economy, not overreacting to 1 month's report or 2 weeks, what happened in the market 2 weeks ago. The law is very clear. The FOMC stabilizes prices, maximizes employment. Doesn't say anything about make administrations happy, make the stock market happy. None of those are in the mandate. Congress has given us the mandate.
You know, they might want to change that mandate down at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. Ultimately, Treasury Secretary Bessent says what's at stake is the Fed's credibility and political legitimacy. Have you seen signs, or has anybody suggested to you that either of those have diminished?
No, I agree with those sentiments. The credibility of any central bank, and the Fed especially, is critically important. So that when you go through episodes like happened coming out of COVID, where inflation goes way up, but if you look at market expectations of what inflation would be in the future, people believed the Fed when it said we're going to get inflation back down to 2%. That is a sacred covenant between a central bank and the American public, that it's going to do the job as the law requires it. Everyone I know involved with the Fed system is open to criticisms, critiques, and analyses of models. How can they be improved? Of forecasts, of the Fed tools. All of those things should be on the table. We should have an adult conversation about those. How can we improve our decision making? That's something different than should there be political interference with the setting of monetary policy? Should the central bank not be independent? And I'm totally opposed to taking away the independence of the central bank, as are unanimously all economists that I know of, because just look at places where there is not central bank independence. Inflation comes back. Growth is slower. Unemployment is worse. So we really don't want to go there. And I don't think that's what they're calling for.
Unfortunately, I have to ask you one more question. Stephen Myron looks like he will be joining you at the 16th and 17th of September meeting. He had some nice things to say about you in his paper on Fed reform last year. Was your appointment sinister? Does he have a point about a revolving door between political administrations and people who are on the Fed?
Look, I'm not going to get into policy. He said my appointment was sinister. I served in an administration, and some 12 years later, I joined the Fed. So I think it's a little strange to call that a revolving door. But I look forward to meeting Stephen Myron, and I'm proud he's coming from the Council of Economic Advisors, which was he had the same job I had 12 years before I joined the Fed. And there's a long history of CEA folks coming over to the Fed and doing a very effective job. I think anybody who comes and joins the FOMC is going to take the job very seriously. It's an important function, and we all just go down there and try to maximize employment, stabilize prices. That's what the law says.
Well, Austan Goolsbee, thank you very much for being diligent enough to come talk to us, and hopefully you'll talk to us shortly after the next meeting.